Hey team, I'm back at you again with a third video to the 3D printing and painting series. In this video, I'm not going to get quite into painting just yet. You see, I've already painted my 2B. I'm not going to paint another 2B. I'm in the middle of something at the moment. I'm going to work on that model, and when I do, I'll video it as well. But right now, I'm not quite up to the painting stage yet. So I wanted to use this video to talk about my process of preparing the model before I paint, and also what kind of equipment I use, including paints and airbrush. So I assume by now you guys sort of know like the standard post-print washing and curing process. For me, I remove the supports under really hot water before I cure it. After it's cured, I use sandpaper where the scars are. I use 320 grit sandpaper and then 600 grit sandpaper. There are going to be areas of the model where there weren't any support, so there are no scars needing to be sanded down. But there are surfaces which are smooth but could still benefit from sanding with 600 grit paper, because once a smooth surface is a little bit rough, it makes it more receptive for future priming. After that is done, I like to fit test my models, make sure they fit. Oftentimes I find though, areas between like different parts, you can see a seam there, there's a joint line. For those sorts of situations I use putty or green stuff, and for other print failures or seams, or really anything else that needs to be taken down a bit, I use Dremel and sandpaper. After that, of course, before you assemble it, you would prime it. So here's a picture of some of the equipment that I use. I've got sandpaper in the top left. We know what that looks like. More interestingly is a Dremel next to it, so that's the one I use. I bought it from Amazon. It's got different tips onto it. I use it to grind stuff down, get rid of just mistakes in general. You've got different examples of putty here. There's Vallejo stuff. I quite like the Vallejo plastic putty. I use it to fill in seams. It's really liquidy, so it gets into the seams really well. You can use a brush, and once it's dry, you can use sandpaper to sort of brush to sand over it and remove any excess. Stuff like green stuff is not liquid, obviously, so it's much better for sculpting and making something or to fill in larger gaps that is not quite small enough for the Vallejo plastic putty. So you can use putty to build stuff up, and sandpaper and the Dremel to shave things down. Next is painting equipment. I use paint to do my painting, obviously. I'll talk a bit more about what kind of paints I use later. I use brushes. I got mine from AliExpress. It's a large range of different size brushes, all the way from 5 zeros to single digits, so it's quite a big range. I use an airbrush. My airbrush is 0.3 millimeters. I don't know what that measures, but that's the size of my airbrush. You need a palette as well for your paint, obviously. You need other hobbying tools as well, tweezers, knives. You can buy these stuff probably from your local hobby store. They often have these hobby kits which contain all of this stuff. You need cleaning supplies as well. I assume you know how to clean up after 3D prints, but with airbrushing in particular, you have to put in quite a lot of cleaning effort to keep the airbrush clean. But I won't be talking about it here. I think each airbrush is different, and I'll let you figure out what kind of maintenance your airbrush needs. Paints. I use Vallejo Game Color, and I use their primers as well. Their Vallejo Game Color comes in like a dropper bottle, originally meant for painting with brushes. So I use water to thin out the paints to make it more appropriate for airbrushing, and I thin them out so that they're a milky consistency. I'm in Australia, and I find that Vallejo Game Color is cheaper than Army Painter and Citadel. I'm especially impressed by Vallejo's new range. So their Game Color range just got a refresh, and now it's the formulation is different, and I'm really liking it. And it would take a lot for me to look elsewhere for paints. If I haven't mentioned it already, Vallejo Game Color seems to be more economical than Army Painter and Citadel options, at least in Australia. Next, I've got two pre-recorded videos that I'll show you. It's the first video is about sort of the anatomy of an airbrush setup, and the second one is about some tips and tricks with using the airbrush that I would have appreciated someone telling me. Without further ado, here are the two videos. This is a PowerPoint. It takes power from the wall into my compressor here. It's a cheap compressor. You can find it on Amazon, I'm sure, AliExpress as well, and many other websites. There are many like it, but this one is mine. You can see I've got it turned on here. It compresses air, you see, and the sort of maximum pressure can be set through this knob here. Here I've got it between 20 and 30, and I recommend you hover around that range. Use a knob here to set the target pressure and just let it be, and don't touch it ever again. When you buy the air hose, which fits onto the compressor, be mindful of the size of the air hose and the compressor. For me, I was like really impatient when I was buying my airbrushing stuff, so I actually bought the wrong hose to fit the compressor. I had to buy this extra adaptive fitting thing, and wait a few extra days until my stuff got here, so I could start painting. It was more expensive, than I originally planned for. Anyway, this air hose goes leads its way into the airbrush here. This is an Iwata HPCH airbrush. I don't know what that means, but it cost a few $100s. I was reading stuff online. They said you shouldn't cheap out on the airbrush, and well, I decided to go for this one. Anyway, that's the anatomy of an airbrushing station. Hey team, I also wanted to spend some time on introducing you to how to operate an airbrush and the different settings and stuff you can do to fiddle around with it. So this is my airbrush. It's a dual action gravity fed airbrush. So dual action, you can control the airflow and the paint flow, and it's gravity fed because you can't use it upside down. You have to rely on gravity to pull the paint into the chamber here. You can see that I don't have paint inside, it's just water, but it should be good enough for a demonstration. So you can control airflow by pushing this lever down. When I push it down, the airflow comes through. It's on or off. You can't adjust the speed of it, at least not with this lever anyway. I can show you how later, but on and off. Okay, the way you airbrush is you start by turning the air on, and then you slowly introduce paint to the stream, the airstream. The way you do that is, and you pull back, and I don't know if you can appreciate, but it's actually water coming out there. I hope the camera can show it quite well. But you can see that I turned the airflow on, I pull backwards. The more I pull, the more water or paint will come out, okay? So this way, if you want to do nice thin coats, you introduce air and you pull back slightly, and that way you only introduce a small amount of paint. If you want to do heavy coats, air and then all the way, as an example. Now, you want to be mindful that you do that in that order exactly. You want to introduce the air before you start to introduce the paint, okay? And when you do that, make sure to stop the water or the paint and then stop the air. So the airflow should always be the first thing that's on and the last thing to go away. The reason for that is if you, for example, don't turn the air on and you just introduce paint straight away, like that, by pulling back, the paint is going to come down here and clog all of that chamber down there. And when you finally introduce the air, it's going to spray out in like a clump of paint. And instead of a smooth flow of paint onto the model, you're going to get a splatter of paint. And that's not ideal most of the time. So remember, airflow, air, paint, stop the paint, then stop the air. I will concede to you though, there are some times when you actually want to get that paint splatter effect, in which case you can elect to introduce the water or the paint and then air, air, air. And then you get the sort of a splatter effect. There's one more setting two more I want to talk to you about. One is pretty self-explanatory. I'm holding my camera in my left hand. I can't demonstrate this easily, but this here is a knob that you can turn. Okay, and the more you turn the knob, the more this thing comes down here, and it basically stops you from pulling the lever back here. So it's like some kind of like it's like a hardware limit capacity to how much you can pull it back. So you stop yourself from fucking up, basically. But yeah, I don't know how to explain it, but I hope you get the point. It's a poor explanation, I concede to you, but hey, you'll get it. I'm sure you will when you come across an airbrush like this. The other thing that's more important, so this one stops you from manually, screwing it up by limiting how much you can pull the lever by. That's a luxury. That's a luxury feature. You don't really need it. If you're careful, you don't really need it. But this here, this is called the MAC valve. I don't know what MAC stands for, but it's a way for you to limit airflow at the level of the airbrush and not at the compressor. So by default, the valve is like fully open and airflow is at its maximal, whatever you set it at the compressor. But if you turn it, you can slowly close off the valve and you can decrease airflow. Now I've completely stopped it because I've turned it all the way, but you get the point. So why would you ever want to decrease your airflow? So if you're painting really close to the model and you're airbrushing it and you're at maximum airstream, what's going to happen is you're just going to blow all the paint away because the paint isn't dry yet, right? I mean, you're airbrushing in real time. The paint's not going to be dry, it's going to be wet, and you're going to be very close to the model, full jet stream, you're just going to blow all the paint away. So when you want to paint close to a model, what you have to do is you decrease the airflow. Can you hear that? I can barely hear that. But that's very, very slow, very gentle airstream. And you do that, and it's not going to blow the paint away. Nice and quiet. Most times, you're going to be at full capacity. You're going to be full speed. When you're painting from a distance, but otherwise, if you're painting close, use the MAC valve as a lifesaver. All right, see you next time.